Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Gentleman Psychic. I know it's just a little bit early. What time is it? About 2 minutes. But I wanted to be here so that you can hear my clock. Went more often. Oh, okay. Went more often. Okay, that makes sense. So I wanted you to hear the clock as it goes. So I am looking forward to today's story. I don't know who is here yet, but I wanted to just welcome you. I know we've got about 1 minute before story time actually begins. So, hello. Hello, welcome. So, welcome to the Gentleman Psychic. I am your host. I am your MC. I am your master of ceremonies. I am your storyteller for the evening. My name is Richard-Lael Lillard. Richard-Lael is one name, not two. My first name is Richard-Lael. It's not Richard. So, I don't like to be called Richard. Anyway, I'm very excited for tonight's story. It is a story by a friend that I've had for many years, and Ash is happily waiting. Good. We're going to wait for the clock before we actually begin. Haha. So my friend wrote this book, and I'm going to actually. It is welcome to. I have to read it phonetically. Went Meroffen. Went Meroffen. This is a book by my dear friend Brian, and I'm excited to start. Hello, Dee. Welcome, my dear friend. Christy, Melissa, Ash. How lovely. Mary Jane, welcome. Okay, my beauties. So a few announcements before we get started. Raven, hello, welcome. I, along with my friend Constantine, are going to be throwing a very big 1920s party. It's sort of it's debauchery and burlesque, and it's going to be in September. The 2nd of September in Atlanta, Georgia. We are looking for vendors, so if you have magic wares, if you make things, I would love to hear from you. We would love to have you come and be at our party. I will also be in Youngstown, Ohio, coming up the 26th through the 30th of October. So the 2nd of September in Atlanta and the 26th through the 30th in Ohio. Now, Mary Jane, good evening from Princess. Good evening. Lovely to have you. So Mary Jane is the one that sort of helped me to figure out what it says, how to pronounce it. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls, guys and gals, and non-gendered pals, I am welcoming you. A welcome to Went Mir Often, a long days and short nights by Brian Bo Neuer. And I would be remiss if I did not read the autograph on the inside. For one of my oldest and dear friends, thank you for your support, Richard-Lael. Your friend, Brian Bo Neuer, B.B. P.S. Don't pay attention to the table of contents. It's off, but since it has been updated. The foreword, it said, the dedication is for my wife, parents, and mother-in-law, as well as everyone that ever laughed at one of my stupid jokes and encouraged them further. Wait till you read this one. Preface. Many stories have been told of Arthur Pendragon's legendary kingdom of Camelot, but there's another often forgotten and even more magical kingdom not far from Camelot. That most magical kingdoms was called Went More Often, pronounced Went Mir Often, and was ruled by the kindly King Archibald Quilkitten. Perhaps the reasoning behind why Went More Often was so unbeknownst was the peculiar and very specific curse cast over the entire kingdom several centuries ago. You see, Wentmoroften was established in an area, an island to be more specific, that happened to have had one of, if not the highest concentrations of pure magic ever seen. Sorcerers, magicians, even deities, or so they claimed to be, sought out this kingdom from far and wide in hopes to improve or build upon their skills and capabilities in magic wielding. But there was one sorcerer, Codswallop, a prankster, who began to abuse the power, causing a lot of mischief and misery among the citizens and magical creatures, and was thus exiled from ever returning. Codswallop wasn't an evil sorcerer by any means. He just had an unusual sense of humor that focused mainly on annoying inconveniences with elaborate or complicated caveats and implications. His final prank, for example, was the aforementioned curse on the kingdom Wentmoroften. Was thriving tourism attraction, as one could imagine. So the gist of the curse was that it would forever be hidden from the world and the memory of it would be erased from history. However, it continues to thrive on, mainly due to being magical and therefore self-sustaining, but also because of one of those complications we talked about. Should an outsider find their way into the kingdom, usually by way of finding the following one of its inhabitants that wandered out, the curse would be lifted. But only for that one person, and the only thing they could remember about their visit is where they found it. As a result, many a wandering adventurer has spent their remaining years retracing their steps trying to find the way back. While I have not been there myself, I did happen to find myself in the company of one such person who did stumble upon the island, and this is one of the stories they passed on to me, supposedly from historical documents of Wentmoroften. The first of many tales, this is the story of the noble knight by the name of Sir Gilder Lilly, and his very first adventure, of which there were many. Chapter 1. Good King Archibald was known to be a man of small stature, and stout, not fat in build, but enormous of heart and wise beyond his years, though he barely stood 5 feet tall. Depending upon what shoes he wore, he was slightly respected. He was highly respected and loved by all his subjects. He had a kindly, round, and some would say quite handsome face, with full and magnificent moustache and shoulder-length hair to match, both chestnut in color. His wife, Queen Amanda Vore, pronounced Amanda Vere, was renowned for her wisdom and unparalleled beauty. Her wavy, raven black hair and soft brown skin, coupled with the deepest blue eyes anyone had ever seen, stood out in any crowd, and her elegant posture easily made her appear over a foot taller than the king. Though she was only about 5'9" at best, she had somewhat slender figure, despite also being known for her love of the culinary arts, and was even a celebrated baker. Her dimpled smile and full cheeks were only able to be replicated by their young daughter, Princess Violet, with the same chestnut hair as her father, but wavy like her mother's, and those same deep blue eyes and lighter shade of her mother's skin. There was no mistaking who her parents were. Violet, being a typical 10-year-old, was most well known for her curiosity, and the fact that she could never be found when her parents needed her. In fact, it is because of our young princess that our hero came to be. Violet loved nature and its inhabitants more than anything else in the kingdom. She spent most of her free time in the garden or out exploring in the area of the woods nearest the castle, and was often seen trying to speak to animals of the forest or trying to teach them to speak to her. The woods were considered perilous by most people, her parents included. But she decided, based on her own experiences, that these statements were unfounded and would therefore not pay heed to the numerous warnings. To appease her ever-worrying parents, though she wore a pendant round her neck that was fashioned by local wizard extraordinaire and the king's adviser, as well as his oldest friend, Alberton, pronounced Alberton, and whom we'll meet soon enough. It was a simple protection charm to keep her from any mishaps, but it really wasn't necessary. As luck would have it, Violet was more special than even she knew, and there was a reason no harm ever befell her. And it was not Alberton's pendant. What none of them knew, but would eventually come to find out one day, was that Violet happened to be the first magic wielder in the royal family's history. The most noticeable indicator for that would be the forest creatures, both magical and non-magical, seemed to be attracted to her. Even the ones known for being not so friendly or overly timid. Violet merely thought it was a combination of the pendant and her natural charm. This made sense to anyone that ever met the princess, as she was not a particularly bratty or spoiled child. She also liked spending time in the villages around the castle and visiting the villagers themselves on the rare occasion, but the woods were her favorite place to play. Every day was pretty much the same for the royal family. They would start with a family breakfast, followed by Violet rushing out the door in search of her next adventure in the wood. The king and queen would go about their business of running the kingdom. Nothing really very interesting, unless you're keen on medieval politics, but they would all reconvene in the evening for dinner. Violet would usually show up covered in her usual layers of mud, twigs, and leaves, and accompanied by at least one guest she encountered in the woods that day. It was usually something small she could carry, like a squirrel, or a frog, or a fairy, and it was always much to the dismay of the king and queen, but they allowed it most of the time. But then, one day, the princess did not come home. At first, the king and queen thought that she was merely delayed or possibly forgot the time and would come rushing in at any moment in her usual amount of disarray. But as the sun began to set and the night fell upon them, they began to worry. Wasting no time, they dispatched a team of knights to question the locals to see if anyone knew of her whereabouts and check her usual play area in the wood. Alas, there was little to no information for the most part, and the consensus was that she was last seen going into the woods, per usual. The team of knights had no choice but to venture forth into the wood, torches ablaze, to find the missing princess. Hours turned into days as the king and queen awaited the arrival of news of the whereabouts of young Violet and the brave team of knights sent to find her. But no news arrived. After a week, the team that was dispatched to find the other missing team and the princess was now also declared missing. Chapter 2. The king and queen grew wearier with each passing day that their daughter remained missing. It didn't help the situation, knowing that their search and rescue teams had also gone missing, and the remaining knights were either too old or too scared to attempt to brave it themselves. None of them could even fathom what sort of being or monster could have made so many gallant warriors and a beloved princess go missing, or worse, taken their very lives. Some were frightened by the idea that they locked themselves in the dungeon, citing their cowardice was the line of treason, and would rather rot away from old age than to face whatever malevolent presence was lurking in those woods. Feeling absolutely lost, King Archibald decided that it was time to consult with Alberton. Perhaps he might have some sage advice or a plan. Alberton was a tall, slender man, very much how you would expect a wizard to look. He had very long white hair that seemed to cascade like water from under his floppy hat, and a beard that was almost as long as his hair. His nose was not long, but it did come to a point, and placed upon the bridge of his nose sat a pair of lenses he fit together in a wire frame over each eye, so he could see better. They made his eyes look huge, though, so he ended up looking like a big owl in a floppy hat and wizard's robes. He had known the king since he was a newborn prince, and was the king's closest friend and leading adviser. "What shall we do, my most trusted of friends?" the king said. "What's left of our knights are either too long in the tooth, or seem to have exhausted their remaining courage and sanity, some to the point that they've arrested themselves for treason and thrown themselves in the dungeon. I mean, as preposterous as it seems, I really do quite understand their sentiment. Still, the Queen and I must not give up hope that our daughter and all others that have gone missing are still very much alive. I beseech you, Alberton, help us find a way, please." "Of course, I'll help you, your majesty," Alberton said assuredly. "My only request is that you give me ample time to consult the stars. I must look to them and see if they might reveal any clues that might prove useful to us. Give me until tomorrow, and I will arrive by evening, hopefully with the information we seek, or, at the very least, something that might be useful to our search, so we can devise a plan." While there was an air of uncertainty in the wizard's tone, King Archibald knew that Alberton would keep his word, and that, good or bad, he would have some sort of news. With that, the king bid him farewell and headed back to the castle. Alberton spent the rest of his day preparing for the night's consultation to the stars. He gathered every scroll and scripture, every volume of every book set he could muster, for divination was not an easy magic to perform. Fortunately, his home was located away from all the hustle and bustle of the main kingdom and its surrounding villages. A lot more of the advanced magic he practiced required concentration that could only come from a remote area that was rich in magic and had few distractions and noises. Not only was the location important for general practice and education of magic mastery, but it was also essential for one practicing the magical art of foresight. And divination was near impossible to perform correctly in loud and busy environments, because the noise disrupts the natural flow of magical energy and can irritate the waves in the air. This chosen solitude led some of the villagers to believe he was somewhat of a hermit, but most of them knew nothing could be further from the truth. Alberton, or Bert, to those who knew him well, was not only quite the social butterfly, but he was also known as the local healer to those in need of medical attention, something that requires one to be well versed in the art of bedside manner and courtesy. The sun began to set, and the first of the stars began waking up to greet the night sky. Alberton was ready to begin a long evening of gazing and interpretation. He knew not what stars would whisper and reveal to him, but whatever it was, he was writing every bit of it down. For those that aren't aware, the most accurate form of divination is a quite tedious process. The moon must be in the right position. You cannot stumble, stutter, or just generally muddle up the incantation. Pronunciation and enunciation must be perfect. And you cannot, and I mean absolutely cannot, even begin this arduous task without first producing the most important piece of the whole process, which is a candle made from coagulated midnight oil that burns at both ends. The flames would burn their normal amber and red color until the stars were ready to start speaking. At that point, it would change to a purple glow, a sure sign that they were ready to spill the beans. As Alberton continued the ritual, the flames began to turn from their usual reddish glow to the purple as described, and the images began pouring into his head, most of which he had no clue as to what they were or what they meant. Some of these images appeared to be glimpses into the future, while others were more of a fever dream. As part of the full process, though, Alberton, still entranced, mind you, reached for his quill and parchment. His hand began to move along the parchment, shakily and slowly, making out what appeared to be very undisciplined versions of letters. What was being written or drawn, he would not know until the stars finished speaking to him. From an outside perspective, this would seem very odd, but I assure you that it's all as expected and completely natural. Now he had begun speaking in deep, threatening tone, and smoke began pouring out of his orifices on his head. Not to mention, the candle would start bleeding. We would want to be concerned because this usually means he botched something up and accidentally summoned a demon or possessed himself. Either situation is not a good place to be mentally or emotionally or physically for that matter. It's difficult to correct, but it can be done. Unfortunately, it also means you would have to restart the whole process, and no one wants to do that. Fortunately, though, for us, Alberton was well practiced, and this was not the case. All was going as it should. Now, back to the story. As the images began to slow and the flames shrank and began to revert to normal, Alberton began to awaken from his trance. Anxious to see what had been revealed to him, he blew out the candle flames, gathered his equipment, and rushed back to his home. He would need ample light to read, if not translate the message he had scribed, and the moonlight was not nearly enough to make that happen accurately. Once inside, Alberton threw his belongings to the floor and hastily took his scribbled-on parchment to his laboratory. His special lenses had become fogged up from the night air mixing with the candle flame's heat, so he abruptly removed them and cleaned them off with his beard hair. He then proceeded to unroll the parchment, and, much to his surprise, the message had no need to be translated, though it was a bit sloppy, and it bore what he believed to be good news. He pored over the message over and over, wanting to make very certain that his eyes were not deceiving him. The message, while simple, was still rather vague and held quite a bit of complexity in it, as most messages from the stars are. They can't make it too easy for you, you know. Alberton held up his parchment as he squinted his eyes and kept repeating the three simple words that were written on the parchment. Alive, stranger, pale. Chapter 3. Surely there's a mistake in spelling, he thought. Perhaps the stars meant pale, P-A-L-E, or maybe he did make the mistake somewhere. Nevertheless, Alberton decided this would have to wait until morning. Maybe by then the answer will come to him, or maybe it would just make more sense. Either way, he knew his body was in desperate need of rest. He retired to his bedchambers, mumbling to himself about the odd message and what it might mean. He did feel some slight relief, however, from the first word, alive, even if he wasn't sure exactly to whom it referred. The next morning, Alberton prepared to head to the castle with his news. While he was still unsure as to what it meant or why it mentioned P-A-I-L, he figured he could focus on the alive for the moment, and perhaps the mystery would unravel itself in due time. He didn't need to pack much, as he kept a secondary lab under the bedchamber at the castle for his studies and housed many of his rare and more valuable artifacts, just to keep them out of the more mischievous hands. It might be good to send a raven ahead with a request for an extra set of hands to help with my research, he said, as he signaled to his raven Edgar, who was perched near him. He wrote out his request on a small strip of parchment and attached it to Edgar's leg. I won't be far behind you, my old friend, he said with a smile to Edgar, as he also gave him a treat for some some currants that he had in a pouch for his snacks for the ride. Edgar happily ate his treat and then took to the sky toward the castle. though the trek to the castle was always generally pleasing to the senses, with all sorts of wonderful plants and trees to see and interesting smells and sounds all around him. It was otherwise less than adventurous. He did happen upon a particular aroma as he passed the woods that he recognized, but couldn't quite pin down what it was or where he knew it from. Oh well, he thought, as he carried on toward the castle. There's no time to investigate the odor today, unfortunately. He arrived at the castle that afternoon, a little later than the king had anticipated, but we all know wizards are never late or early, right? Regardless, he was welcomed with open arms from the king and queen. The king's spirits lifted higher from what they had been. He had decided to cut the formalities and small talk short. First things first, he said. Luncheon is nearly ready, and I suddenly find myself with more of an appetite than I've had as of late, thanks to your arrival and what appears by the look on your face to be some good news. What say we discuss this at the table while we eat, eh? To which Alberton nodded to an agreement. As he motioned for the king to lead the way, he knew that the king's appetite had not been up to its normal standard since all the events that had happened. So it lifted his heart to see the king eating again and making an effort to smile in spite of it all. It couldn't have been easy to lose a daughter and several nights within a span of days, but he couldn't help but feel that the ambiguity of the message might dampen the overall joyous mood of the room. As they supped, Alberton pulled the parchment from his satchel he had been carrying and showed the king and the queen, who looked over it slightly confused. "Hail," said the king. "Are you certain there wasn't something you forgot in the divination process, my old friend? Or maybe something you inadvertently added, perhaps? You weren't engaged in another one of your experiments with plants that supposedly have healing properties again, were you? Remember that one plant that you found that smelled funny, much like a skunk? Such a strange plant. I remember the day of the lightning storm that a plant was sitting by the window when it got struck and set ablaze. The whole castle filled with smoke of that burning plant, and no one that was present that day remembers anything that happened after that." It's true that Alberton was as much a student of science as he was magic. He relished the idea that renewable resources such as local flora and fauna could be used by anyone to make cures for simple ailments or relieve pain, thus preserving magic for the more complex issues and practices. He was convinced that certain foods even could be used as cures or give one an energy boost when they were otherwise exhausted. And we all know he was very much correct, and could arguably be known as history's first nutritionist. After all, he was quite active for a man well into his hundreds. No, nothing like that, Your Majesty. Though, come to think of it, I also don't remember much about that day. I may have to revisit that experiment one of these days, he said, losing focus. But for now, we need to focus on the matter at hand, and that would be locating this stranger and this pale stranger, perhaps? Whatever. He stopped for a moment, looking around the room as if to be looking for something or someone. Your Majesty, if I may ask, did you receive my message via Edgar requesting an extra set of hands? "Ah, yes, indeed," said the king, happy to change the subject. "In fact, I had some of the royal guard head to the villages to see if there would be anyone who could volunteer their service and perhaps gain a new job skill. I have it under the authority that you should have some help arriving soon. Sometime tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I've had your tower cleaned up and arranged for you, as I assumed you would be residing here while you planned. Was I correct in my assumption?" Alberton looked impressed. "How can I refuse after you? After you've already gone through the trouble, Your Majesty, of course I'll stay. Speaking of which, if it's not too rude of me, I am a bit taxed from my journey. What say we continue this first thing in the morning?" With that, the king nodded and excused his old friend to retire for the night. he decided it would be wise for him and the queen to do so as well, for tomorrow promised to be a big day, and the beginning of yet another perilous quest for, well, someone. They didn't know who yet, but it was going to be someone they'd apparently never met before. And he was going to be pale? Or carrying a pail? Something along those lines. Anyway, they all went to bed, and, for the first time in a long time, the king and queen slept soundly and dreamt of hope. Chapter 4. Morning came early for Alberton, as he had become quite accustomed to his own bed and was none too keen on the pillowy soft mattress provided to him. Fortunately, he had brought with him some comforts of home to help start the day. Before all of this happened, Alberton had discovered a type of bean that, when roasted and ground, could be steeped in boiling water and drained to make a tasty and fragrant beverage that made the morning much more tolerable. The old wizard dressed himself and left his quarters to attend breakfast with the king and queen. To his surprise, the king appeared to be absent, leaving only the queen. Alberton was always amazed at how the queen was such a vision to behold, even early in the morning, or in a time where appearance should be the least of one's concerns. What was her secret, he often wondered. "Good morning, Sir Wizard. I trust you slept well," she said, sipping at a cup of hot tea. Alberton always found her voice to be so pleasant, but could easily pick up the undertone of authority, regality, and wisdom that it carried with it. It almost sounded to Alberton that she could tell his slumber was less than enjoyable. I slept adequately, I suppose, Your Majesty. One does always have a bit of trouble when not sleeping in their usual bed, eh? But that's not to say your courtesy and hospitality isn't always much appreciated, and certainly more than an old wizard like me deserves. But where is our king this fine morning?" Alberton asked. He always did his best to be cordial and proper with the queen, as he believed that such a beauty may also harbor a dangerous side that no one mortal or otherwise should ever dare to invoke. So he thought it best to remain on her good side, which was much easier than he gave her credit for. He was always very much intimidated by her, even if it was unjustified. He just thought of being respectful. "Old Archibald," she said, with a raised eyebrow and the slightest yet charming smile, "will be along shortly. He's apparently directing one of our staff on setting up accommodations for your new help, who should be arriving soon, if I understand correctly." She was amused at how cordial and proper Alberton always tried to be with her and found it rather endearing. She knew full well the history and relationship the king and the old wizard had, almost like he was a second father to the king. She just wished he'd learned to relax around her, but she wouldn't dare to tell him out of respect for him, what with him being an elder and all. Well, in that case, Your Majesty, may I be so bold as to sit with you then, and we can catch up a bit while we wait." The queen was delighted at the offer, as this was the most relaxed Alberton had ever acted around her, and she relished the opportunity to get to know more about her husband's most trusted friend. She smiled and nodded, motioning for him to take a seat across from her. She brought him up to speed on their overall health and informed him of everything they'd already attempted to try and locate their daughter. She was concerned for the king's mental well-being, and Alberton could detect a bit of distress in her voice as she spoke of everything, and who wouldn't be emotionally taxed by this, really, he thought. Still, despite her situation, the queen was able to conduct herself in the bravest manner and maintain a sense of calm about herself. A most admirable quality in the old wizard's eyes. Their conversation was interrupted by the announcement from attending staff that the king was now entering the room. So the two of them stood up with a slight spring in his step. It was apparent that the king's morning was going well, and that his spirits were finally beginning to lift. After all, they were now ready to get down to business and come up with a plan of action. "Alberta, my friend, so nice to see you. Oh, I hope you slept well. I was just informing some of the guard that we are expecting a visit from the village this morning, and that he was to report directly to you. I assume you'll be headed to your tower after we finish up with breakfast?" the king said anxiously, seating himself and tucking his napkin into his collar to prepare his morning meal. He seemed very motivated, much more than he had been in the past week, according to the queen. "Indeed, your majesty, I've some scrolls I would like to research, and I must comprise a list of artifacts I'd like to pull from my inventory that may prove useful in helping us decipher this message. I'm also preparing some items to help our hero on his quest. I do hope my new assistant is ready to get it once he arrives. I don't want to waste a minute of time getting everything sorted out and arranged," he said, with a sense of urgency and a hint of perplexity to his tone. He wondered how much time would be wasted trying to find this prophesized hero, to which they had no real clue as to how to even find. The three of them conversed a little more over breakfast, then Alberton excused himself so that he may begin his preparations. He had a feeling that it would be a very long day. Roughly an hour and 15 minutes later, bet you weren't expecting such a descriptive time frame, were you? A knock came to Alberton's door. He beckoned for his guest to enter as he was reading over some ancient scrolls that he had pulled a while, dictating to a quill that was writing by itself on some parchment nearby. The door creaked open slowly, and a young man with fiery red, disheveled hair poked his head in and meekly asked, "Is this the wizard's quarters that I was instructed to report to?" Alberton abruptly stopped what he was doing and looked to the young man. "Oh, why, yes, come in, come in. You must be, well, quite frankly, my dear boy, I wasn't given a name to refer to you. So tell me, what do we call you? What is your name, lad?" "Gil, my lord. Everyone calls me Gil," he said as he shuffled into the room and looked at the door as if to ask whether it should be shut or left open. Alberton noticed he was not as gangly as he had originally imagined his assistant would be. In all honesty, he had quite the heroic build to him, while not being massively or awkwardly tall. "Gil, you say? Well, you look to be one who is certainly used to harder labor than what you will be doing here. Tell me, what is it exactly your family does? What do you do to maintain your livelihood? Are you a farmer's son? How old are you?" he asked the boy, all while continuing his research, but still trying to maintain the fact that he was multitasking and trying not to be rude to his guest. "I'm the blacksmith's son, my lord, so I've worked." But he was interrupted by the wizard. "Please, Gil, I'm no lord, just Alberton will do fine. But do continue, please. A blacksmith's son, you say?" "Yes, sir. A lab. I'm the assistant. Blacksmith to my father, and I'm 17, soon to be 18. He was a bit ashamed. He couldn't pronounce the wizard's name, but decided he would try harder next time. "I make horseshoes and some of the simpler items and do most of the heavier lifting and cleanup around the shop." He was looking around the room as if he had never seen such a mess. The room was filled with stacks of books and piles of scrolls and other objects, some of them with an odd glow to them, which intrigued young Gil. He noticed the wizard was now looking around as if he had lost something most precious. Sir, I noticed you seem to be looking for something. Might I help you look for whatever it is?" What's that? Yes, absolutely," Alberton said, obviously distracted. I seem to have misplaced the helmet, a set of enchanted armor I acquired some years ago." He pointed to a set of armor that was mounted on the corner of the room, while not the most ornate set. It was very shiny, almost as if it were glowing, like many of the other items Gil had seen. Perhaps if we start with a bit of cleaning up, it may reveal itself to us. Wouldn't you agree? He asked and looked around the room. Gil nodded and rolled up his sleeves. As he was sorting, restacking, and putting dusty old books on even dustier old shelves, he decided it might be a good idea to do some actual cleaning as well, rather than just rearranging. How on earth does he find anything in this chaos? He thought out loud. What's that you say, my boy? Alberton asked, and he looked up to see what the noise was. Nothing, sir. I was just thinking out loud, Gil said, sure that the wizard had heard exactly what he said. And you think out loud often, do you, Gil? Alberton asked, seemingly quite interested in his response. More than my family cares for, unfortunately, sir, he said as he worked. Alberton smiled slightly and continued to work. Gil suspected Alberton was keeping something from him at that point. He looked around the room for possible cleaning utensils when he stopped what appeared to be a broom handle under a pile of more clutter. He carefully navigated under the piles of scrolls and stacks of books to reach his quarry, only to find that it was a mop instead. But upon further inspection, however, he noticed the bucket that the mop was resting in. It was easily the cleanest thing in the room, almost as shiny as the armor in the corner. He unburied the peculiar bucket for a closer look and was disappointed to discover such an otherwise well-kept bucket had two holes in the side of it, or rather, one big hole that looked to be two smaller holes combined into one. He studied it for a moment before grinning to himself and placing the bucket on his head. The holes seemed to line up perfectly with his eyes. Another curiosity. I don't think you'll be getting a lot of mopping done with this bucket, Alabaster. It has holes in it, he yelled, quite pleased with himself over a witty remark. It's Alberton, young man. I suppose for the sake of brevity you by the stars, it's you, Alberton exclaimed as he stumbled over himself backwards and onto the floor as if he had just seen his own ghost. My boy, he said, much quieter but still very excitedly, you are the stranger in the prophecy I was given. Help me up, won't you? He asked as he shook his hands about to signal for help off the floor. Gil ran over and helped him up. Ha ha! It appears you also found the helmet we are looking for. Now that I look at it, it really does look like a defective bucket, doesn't it? A pail! That may also explain why I got it for such a bargain, he said, looking over the bucket and obviously distracted. But was that what the stars which was trying to tell me? The old wizard's face broke into the biggest smile it had ever made. We have found our hero. Chapter 5. I'm afraid I don't follow, Albatross, said Gil, obviously very confused amidst the wizard's excitement, as he had not been given the details of the situation at hand. It's Alberton, first of all, but as I started to say before, you can just call me Bert. It's been my nickname since I was a boy, and it's more than likely much easier for you to remember, Alberton said as he was shuffling through the various papers on his desk until he found exactly what he was looking for. The prophecy from the stars. Now, see here, lad, he said, extending the tattered parchment to Gil. This was the clue given to me 2 nights before by the stars through divination. Gil looked over the parchment with much intrigue. Why me? He wondered, puzzled, and looked to Alberton and asked, So what does it mean, Bert? Oh my, that felt awkward, saying that out loud. Bert. That's going to take some getting to used to, that is. Alberton sat down with Gil and explained everything in full detail, which took quite a bit of while, but what does it have to do with me? Gil asked, still confused. You, my friend? are the one the prophecy spoke of. You must be. It all makes sense. That with a bucket-shaped helmet, and the fact that I had no idea who you were when we met, a stranger, so to speak. So it's up to you, my boy, to find the missing princess and the knights. Alberton said as he jumped from his seat and ran to the door, yelling for one of the guards. Gil couldn't hear what he was telling the guard, other than the words and make haste at the end of his instructions. Alberton then shut the door and turned his attention back to Gil, still smiling and looking very proud of his discovery. First, I've sent for the king. First, I've sent for the king and the queen. They absolutely must hear this news immediately. Oh, how exciting, he said, overjoyed as he danced clumsily around the room, before coming to a halt. Gracious me, I must compose myself before the king and queen get here, he said as he attempted to calm himself through breathing exercises and random body movements, like rolling his neck and head and shaking out his hands. A few moments later, the king and queen arrived at Alberton's tower, anxious to see what the wizard had to tell them. We were told you had news of the utmost importance, Bert. What have you discovered? The queen asked. The king stood slumped over, catching his breath and pointing and nodding in agreement with the queen's statement. Admittedly, she was unable to hide the excitement in her voice, which came as a bit of surprise to Alberton. Quite right, and that's certainly no embellishment. The parchment was right all along, Your Majesty, and, Your Majesty, see just here, was the word pale, and that confused us all. Young Gil here happened to find the helmet to my enchanted armor that I had been looking for. Turns out it had been mistaken for an old mop bucket all this time by the housekeepers. When he asked me about it, he was wearing it on his head, as intended, of course, to show me the bucket had holes in it. And it was at that very moment it occurred to me that Gil here is our stranger we are told to look for, Alberton said, hardly able to contain his own excitement. To be fair, sir, Gilbert interrupted, it only caught my attention because it was unusually shiny for a hole-ridden mop bucket, he said rather meekly. After all, he was in the presence of the king and queen, and directly addressing them. How would you feel and react? Be honest. The king and queen looked at the bucket, and then at each other, then back at Gil, quite puzzled. Alberton, on the other hand, perked up at the boy's statement and seemed quite intrigued. Shiny! Whatever do you mean, young man? Are you jesting me? The king asked. Oh. Shiny? Whatever do you mean, young man? Are you jesting me? The king asked. Well, Your Majesty, Gil gulped. It's shiny. I mean, it's not quite as shiny as the armor over there, but it's still rather shiny, Gil said, pointing to the enchanted armor in the corner. The king and queen both followed Gil's finger, then looked back at Gil and Alberton, more confused than before. But the old armor looks worse than the dingy hole-riddled bucket, said the queen. You haven't been dabbling in wizards' experimental potions, have you, young man? She asked, quite concerned. Alberton chuckled at the thought as he jumped into the conversation. No, Your Majesty, but I believe I can answer all of your questions, including young Gil's, he said as he lowered himself onto a stool. The abridged version is quite simply that the boy is a magic wielder. It all makes sense, really, if you think about it, he said, very proudly of yet another discovery he had made. He was really on the ball today. Meanwhile, the rest of the room looked even more confused. Begging your pardon, Bert, Gil said, but what do you mean I'm a magic wielder? He asked, the king and queen nodding and asking Alberton to elaborate. My family has no magical background. At least, I don't think it does. My parents never really talked family history with me. You see, truth be told, the only thing I've ever been told is that we come from a long line of the most talented blacksmiths in the kingdom. What they fail to realize is that they were, in actuality, the most talented blacksmiths in history, in unrecorded, of course, because, the curse. But that's a subject we might cover at a later time. Not in this story, though, sadly. Perhaps this could be the subject of another book in the series. But I digress. Magic is a very mysterious force, my boy, Albertan said to him, and no one really knows how to decide who it takes a shine to, literally. What you see is not the normal object, like the king and queen see, but the magic contained in it to non-magic wielders. These items, take the armor for example, appear to be just an old armor set or a dingy old mop bucket. Speaking of which, perhaps it is time we see how the armor fits you, and what luck the king and queen are here for the occasion. Yes, what a splendid idea, Bert. Well, what a splendid idea, Bert, the king said. Now go on, my boy, put on the armor. Let's have a look-see. The king and queen were excited at the prospect of being able to begin the search much sooner than the destined hero had been located, now that the destined hero had been located. This meant that, with little hope and a lot of luck, they might soon discover the whereabouts of their missing daughter and knights. Gil stepped hesitantly towards the armor and lifted it from its mount. He strapped all the armor in place and found it to be a bit snug, but it figured it was most likely just a matter of needing to be broken in or needing to be oiled from sitting for so long. I suppose now all I need is the helmet, he said as he gestured to Albertan to hand it to him, since he was the one closest to it. Could you hand it to me, please, Bert? Albertan nodded and slowly bent down, cracking his back and in the process, and picked up the helmet. As he handed it to Gil, he winked and, with a smile and a nod, said to him, Congratulations, my boy. We expect great things of you. Gil, now gushing with pride, placed the helmet on his head. Well, how do I look? He asked, arms outstretched and turning around to show it all off. But as he finished speaking, something unusual started to happen. The armor began glowing even more and was quite visible even to the king and queen. Bert, what's happening to me, sir? Gil asked fearfully, as he could feel his body beginning to tingle quite strangely, like it was changing. Ha ha ha! Nothing to worry about, my dear boy, the wizard said nervously. The pieces have all come together and on a host, so the charm is activating. You should soon be able to see the armor in its true form. He wasn't entirely confident this was the case, but he was certainly trying to convince himself that he was right about this. I don't feel quite right, sir, Gil shouted worriedly. The light continued to grow brighter, then suddenly let out a quick and concussive flash that blew books and scrolls all over the room. The king and queen held on to each other, if for no other reason, to keep the other from blowing over. Albertan shielded his face and eyes, but just as quickly as the burst came, it was gone, and all was calm again. Well, almost. Gil was still in a slight panic, which was completely understandable. They all slowly brought their arms down and opened their eyes to see the extent of damage from what happened. But what they saw was more shocking than they could ever have imagined. Staring, mouths gaping, the three were making Gil feel rather uncomfortable. Why is everybody staring at me? He asked, deciding to break the eerie silence. Have I got something on my... Hang on. Did everyone in the room suddenly get taller? The king stepped forward and looked him over and up and down. He then began tracing his hands from the top of his head over Gil attempting to measure him. He still had to stand on his tiptoes to reach the top of the Gil's head, much to his chagrin. He then turned to Albertan, curiosity piqued. I say, Bert, old bean, Wasn't there, I don't know, how do you put this, more of this boy before we put the armor on? He looked back at Gil, worried, and then back at Alberton. Where did the rest of him go? Not that I have much to say on the matter, but I was expecting our hero to be a taller, no offense, dear boy, he said as he turned to apologize to Gil. Alberton looked at Gil, then at the king, and simply shrugged. This was certainly a new one for him. Chapter 6. What happened to me, Bert? Gil asked, his tone becoming more frantic. Oh, well, if I had to guess, and I do at this point, I'd say the armor shrank you, my boy. Serves me right, I suppose. I did get a very good deal on that set as far as pricing on enchanted armor goes, which is a rare find to begin with. But as I mentioned before, once a set of enchanted armor is placed on a host, it takes its true form. Looks as though this may have been meant for someone of a smaller stature, so it shrank you to fit it. In most cases, removing an article of it should break the charm. I'll go ahead and remove the helmet to see what happens. Gil slowly placed his hands on each side of the helmet and proceeded to try and lift it from his head. Notice I said, try. That's because the helmet refused to budge. He tugged a little harder, thinking it might just be stuck, but the helmet wasn't moving, and it felt more like he was trying to remove his own head from his body. This isn't working, Bert. Any other bright ideas? Gil asked, slightly frustrated at this point, but still mostly afraid. Maybe try another piece, like one of the greaves, said Alberton. Not very confident in his advice, by the way. Greaves, for those of you who don't know, are the parts of the armor that cover your shins. It could be that it's meant to be removed in a certain order, lad, but after trying pretty much every piece and each one feeling like it was attempting to remove one of his own extremities, it was concluded that Gil was now inexplicably stuck like this until further notice. As he sat there for a moment, still worrying, Gil had a thought. Hang on, if I'm stuck like this, how am I supposed to eat or sleep? How am I supposed to pee, Bert? But Alberton did not have an answer to this. Gil sat back down and started staring longingly at an apple he picked off a desk. He loved apples. What if he never got to eat another one? As he pondered this, he started to feel something else happening. He could feel himself licking his lips, but they weren't necessarily lips. Something else is happening, Bert. Alberton, looking up from his scrolls, as he was trying to find a cure, stood perplexed. The king and queen looked on in a combination of intrigue, horror, and, dare I say it, disgust. The helmet had developed a horizontal crack, and it began moving. Say something, Gil. Quickly now, Alberton instructed. What am I supposed to say? Gil said, and as he did, the crack moved, mimicking the same movements of a mouth would make. Gil, my boy, you seem to have developed a mouth. How extraordinary. It's like the armor sensed you were feeling distressed and accommodated you for it. This may also explain how you're able to talk and breathe, even though you can't remove the helmet. It's like the armor has replaced your outer body, or, at the very least, your own skin. How fascinating, he said, as he studied Gil's new appearance. Are you saying I'm basically dead, Bert? Gil asked. Oh, no, of course not. Enchanted armors can be complex. I'm sure I'll eventually figure out what this armor came from, where it came from exactly, and I'll find a way to break the charm, dear boy, but it'll take some time. The tension was obviously building between the two of them, so the queen stepped in. And as such then, Alberton, that will be your task while young Gil is set out on his quest. This way, he will be well occupied in the meantime, and that would give you, hopefully, ample time to find his cure, or whatever it is, upon his return. Would you agree, Archibald? She said, turning to the king. Yes, quite right, my love, quite right indeed. However, before he can officially begin his quest, there is a matter of formalities that cannot be ignored. Let's see, the king said, looking around the room before spotting what he had been looking for. Aha! He exclaimed, as he scurried over and picked up a sword he had found on the floor, peeking out of a pile of books. Honestly, who would leave such a thing lying about all willy-nilly? Someone could get hurt. He cleared his throat and proceeded. Step forward, young man, and kneel, please. Gil looked at Alberton, shrugged, then stepped forward and proceeded to kneel. By the power invested in me, I hereby grant you the position of knight in the king's court. Arise, Sarah. He paused for a moment, only to lean in and whisper, Is Gil your full name, young man? To which Gil sighed and whispered back. The king smiled and nodded. Arise, Sir Gilder-Lily, knight of the king's court. Alberton and the queen applauded. The ceremony congratulated Gil. Sir Gilder-Lily, I mean. The king also applauded, then nodded as he spoke. Yes, congratulations are certainly in order, my boy. But let's not lose focus on why we are here. It would be wise to gather some supplies and provisions for your journey. And you'll probably want this as well, he said as he extended his arms out to Sir Gilder-Lily, presenting him with the very sword he had been knighted with. Not that you'll necessarily need it, and I hope you don't, but it would be a good idea to carry it with you nonetheless. Can't be too careful, you know. He then stepped back to get a good look at the hero and plan his next words. Right now, the king said, I shall arrange preparations to get you a horse from my stables. Let us reconvene at first light. Wouldn't want you to start your journey in the dark, as we found that would be an extremely poor strategy. With that, the king and queen took their leave, and Gil, for the sake of brevity, and Alberton looked at each other. Alberton nervously pulled up a seat and invited Gil to do the same. I'm terribly sorry, my dear boy. Had I known the provisions of the enchantment of this armor, I never would have asked you to place it upon yourself. I truly do feel horrible for this. Gil sat silently for a minute before he let out a sigh. It's not really that bad. I won't be reaching any tall shelves without employing a ladder, but one good thing came of it, sir, he said with a slight smile, as he looked at Alberton. And what could that be, lad? The old wizard asked. Well, sir, I've been knighted. It's not every day you see the son of a blacksmith become a knight in the king's court, he said, as he brandished his sword. And it also means we can all find out what happened to the missing princess and those other knights, Bert. I admit I don't know the first thing about what I'm doing, or even if I'll succeed, but you can be certain that I'm going to try my best and hope to be the hero you all believe me to be. Well said, Sir Gilder-Lily. Well said indeed, Alberton said as he chuckled a little and raised himself from his seat. That's all quite true, and I have nothing but the utmost confidence in you. That armor may yet serve you well, but I promise you this, my boy, I will not stop searching for the cure or counterspell for your predicament while you're away. Any ritual I can perform, it doesn't matter. Whatever is needed to reverse this, I'll find it. You have my words as a wizard of the highest order, and I hope I'll have found it by the time you return. And I truly believe you will return. I know not what lies ahead for you or the perils you might face, but I know that my thoughts are with you. For now, we should rest up. First light comes faster than you think around here. Trust me, I know, the wizard said, thinking about how much he disliked sleeping on the bed that wasn't his own, and was very much not looking forward to doing it again. With that, Gil left the tower and headed towards his own chambers. Sir Gilderlily, he said quietly to himself, as he reached the door to his chambers, and proceeded to enter so he could rest up. Tomorrow was the beginning of his very first adventure. That is where we leave for the evening. I need a paper to put in here. Let's see. What do I have lying here? We'll put circus stickers in it. Now, let's see. We have lemon juice. Hello. Lisa Wonderful Heart. Hi from Jomo. Hello. Ash Durham. Mary Jane King. I love this. I can see it for kids who aren't restricted by religious. Yes, thank you. Sorry, by Christian Mythos. Looking fabulous, and it's funny. And Fire Crystal, hello. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll continue reading next week. It should go very quickly. We'll finish it. We'll finish it up in the next couple of weeks. Anyway, thank you for all of your likes, comments, and shares. Look for my friend Brian. I'm just going to show you Beaunoyer. Benoyer. I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly. But anyway, this is the book, and I don't know where you can find it. Let's see. I don't know, but I'll find out. I'll find out more information, and I'll let you know. Anyway, thank you for all of your wonderful selves. I bid you a sweet and pleasant night rest, and I hope to see you in another readings. Love to you. Good night.